The sound of bare feet striking the gymnasium floor echoed through Lincoln High like thunder. Maya Rodriguez moved with fluid precision, her body spinning through the air in ways that defied gravity. 3 girls cornered her near the stage, their perfectly manicured nails glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. But Maya wasn't the helpless new girl they thought they were targeting. Years of capoeira training in the streets of São Paulo had forged her into something they couldn't comprehend. What started as an attempt to force her out of the talent show was about to become their greatest mistake. This is a story of cultural pride, hidden strength, and a performance that would shake Lincoln High to its core. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Maya Rodriguez had never imagined her life would lead her to the small town of Riverside Falls, North Carolina. Just 6 months ago, she was dancing capoeira in the vibrant streets of São Paulo, surrounded by the rhythm of berimbaus and the warmth of her father's encouraging voice. Now at 16, she found herself living with her Aunt Carmen in a modest apartment above Café Brasilia, the only piece of home she had left after the accident that took her parents. The transition from the bustling metropolis of Brazil to this quiet American town felt like stepping into a completely different world. Lincoln High School stood like a fortress of red brick and tradition, its hallways lined with decades of championship banners and homecoming queen portraits. Maya walked these halls with her head high, but she could feel the weight of curious stares following her every step. Her dark hair fell in natural waves past her shoulders, and her olive skin marked her as different in a school where diversity was more of a concept than a reality. She wore simple clothes that Carmen could afford, but they carried themselves with a confidence that spoke of deeper strength. The whispers started on her first day. Students huddled near lockers, their voices carrying just loud enough for her to catch fragments. Foreign girl. Doesn't speak English well. Probably here illegally. Maya understood every word perfectly, her English honed through years of international school in São Paulo, but she chose silence over confrontation. Her father had taught her that strength revealed itself in patience, that the smartest fighters waited for the right moment to show their true capabilities. Aunt Carmen worked 16-hour days to keep the cafe running, serving coffee and pastéis to a small but loyal customer base who appreciated authentic Brazilian flavors. She was a woman weathered by years of struggle, having immigrated to America 20 years earlier with nothing but determination and a handful of family recipes. When Maya's parents died in the car accident, Carmen didn't hesitate to take her in, despite barely managing her own expenses. She saw Maya's pain in the way the girl moved, recognizing the loss of someone who had been dancing since she could walk. At Lincoln High, Maya tried to blend into the background, focusing on her studies and avoiding the complex social hierarchies that govern teenage life. She sat alone during lunch, picking at cafeteria food that bore no resemblance to the rich flavors of home, watching other students navigate their established friend groups with practiced ease. The loneliness was suffocating, but she had learned to find solace in movement. After school, when the building emptied, she would sneak into the gymnasium and practice her capoeira forms, her body remembering the teachings of her father even as her heart ached for his guidance. Chloe Bennett ruled Lincoln High with the kind of effortless authority that came from being born into privilege. At 17, she was captain of the cheerleading squad, homecoming queen, and 3-time consecutive winner of the school's annual talent show. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her clothes bore designer labels, and her social media following included half the school's population. She moved through the hallways like royalty, flanked by her constant companions Madison Clark and Sophia Taylor, who served as both admirers and enforcers of her social reign. Madison, with her red hair and sharp green eyes, was the strategist of the group, always 3 steps ahead in the social chess game that defined high school politics. Sophia, quieter but equally dangerous, specialized in psychological warfare, her innocent face masking a talent for finding and exploiting weaknesses. Together, they formed a trinity of teenage power that had gone unchallenged for years. The talent show represented more than just entertainment to Chloe. It was validation of her superiority, proof that she deserved the pedestal the school had placed her on. Maya's presence at Lincoln High initially registered as barely a blip on Chloe's radar. Another scholarship kid, another face in the crowd of mediocrity that surrounded her daily existence. But something about the way Maya carried herself, the quiet confidence that seemed to emanate from her very being, began to irritate Chloe in ways she couldn't quite articulate. It wasn't submission or admiration she saw in Maya's eyes when their paths crossed in the hallway. It was indifference, as if Chloe's entire social empire was beneath notice. The first real confrontation came during third-period English class. Mrs. Henderson had assigned a presentation on cultural heritage, and Maya chose to speak about capoeira, the martial art that had shaped her childhood and connected her to generations of Brazilian history. She spoke with passion about the art form's origins among enslaved Africans, how it disguised combat training as dance, how it represented resistance and freedom through movement. Her presentation was eloquent, informed, and deeply personal, earning respectful attention from classmates who had never heard her speak at length before. Chloe sat in the back row, her manicured fingers drumming against her desk as Maya commanded the room's attention. She watched her classmates lean forward, genuinely interested in learning about a culture none of them had encountered before. For 20 minutes, Maya held the spotlight that Chloe considered her birthright, and the resentment that bloomed in Chloe's chest was immediate and intense. When Maya finished her presentation to genuine applause, Chloe's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. After class, as students filtered into the hallway, Chloe intercepted Maya near her locker. Her approach was calculated, friendly on the surface, but loaded with subtext that anyone familiar with high school social warfare would recognize immediately. She complimented Maya's presentation with words that dripped false sweetness, her tone suggesting that she was impressed despite her obvious expectations to the contrary. Madison and Sophia flanked her, their presence adding weight to what seemed like a casual conversation but felt more like a territorial marking. Maya responded politely, but without the deference Chloe expected. She thanked Chloe for the compliment and began organizing her books, clearly ready to end the interaction and move on to her next class. This dismissal, subtle but unmistakable, was something Chloe had never experienced before. Students at Lincoln High competed for her attention, hung on her every word, sought her approval like it was oxygen. Maya's casual indifference felt like a slap across the face. The conversation turned to the upcoming talent show, Lincoln High's most anticipated annual event. Chloe mentioned her string of victories with practiced modesty, clearly expecting Maya to express admiration, or at least acknowledge her dominance in the competition. Instead, Maya simply nodded and mentioned that she might consider participating herself, her tone suggesting that Chloe's track record was interesting but not particularly intimidating. The silence that followed was loaded with tension, 3 pairs of eyes studying Maya as if she were a fascinating but potentially dangerous specimen. When Maya walked away, Chloe stood frozen in the balk.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Hallway, her carefully constructed world suddenly feeling less stable than it had moments before. Madison leaned close, her voice low and calculating as she pointed out that Maya's confidence could be a problem if left unchecked. Other students were watching the exchange, picking up on the subtle power dynamics at play. If someone could dismiss Chloe Bennett so casually and walk away unscathed, what did that say about her supposedly unshakable authority? Sophia suggested that Maya needed to understand how things worked at Lincoln High, that certain social boundaries existed for good reasons. The 3 girls exchanged looks that communicated years of shared understanding, the kind of wordless planning that came from executing similar campaigns against threats to their social order. Maya Rodriguez had just painted a target on her back without even realizing it, and Chloe Bennett was already planning her response. That afternoon, Maya made her way to the gymnasium for her unofficial practice session, unaware that her presentation had shifted something fundamental in the school's social ecosystem. She changed into comfortable clothes in the empty locker room, her movements quiet and efficient as she prepared to lose herself in the physical meditation that capoeira represented. The gymnasium was vast and echoing, filled with the scent of old wood and teenage sweat, its polished floor reflecting the afternoon sunlight that streamed through high windows. She began with basic movements, her body flowing through the familiar sequences that her father had taught her since childhood. The ginga, the fundamental step that gave capoeira its distinctive rhythm, came as naturally as breathing. Her feet moved in the triangular pattern that created space and generated power, her weight shifting between legs as her arms moved in protective, flowing motions. With each movement, she could hear her father's voice in her memory, correcting her form, encouraging her spirit, reminding her that capoeira was more than physical technique. As she progressed to more complex movements, Maya's body began to remember the joy that had been buried under months of grief and adjustment. The a cartwheel that transitioned into attack or defense, flowed seamlessly into the mei a lua de compasso, a spinning kick that required perfect balance and timing. Her movements became more dynamic, more expressive, as muscle memory took over and her conscious mind finally quieted. This was where she found peace, in the space between earth and air, in the moment when her body moved faster than her thoughts. Unknown to Maya, her afternoon sessions had not gone completely unnoticed. Tyler Kim, a quiet sophomore with a talent for computers and a tendency to observe rather than participate, had discovered her practice routine weeks earlier. He often stayed late to work on programming projects in the computer lab, and the gymnasium sounds carried through the building's ventilation system. Curiosity had eventually led him to peer through the small window in the gymnasium door, where he witnessed something that completely captivated him. Tyler had never seen anything like capoeira before. The combination of martial arts, dance, and acrobatics seemed almost supernatural to someone whose physical activities were limited to occasionally walking to the cafeteria. He found himself staying later and later, timing his computer lab sessions to coincide with Maya's practice, watching her move through sequences that looked like choreographed magic. Part of him wanted to introduce himself, to ask questions about the art form that clearly meant so much to her. But social anxiety and the unspoken rules about crossing social boundaries kept him silent. What Tyler didn't realize was that his fascination with Maya's practice sessions was about to become a tool in someone else's campaign. His tendency to lurk in shadows and observe from distances had been noticed by students who understood the value of having eyes and ears throughout the school. Information was currency in high school social politics, and Tyler Kim had unknowingly accumulated a wealth of potentially valuable data about the new girl who had somehow managed to irritate Chloe Bennett. Meanwhile, Maya finished her practice session with a sequence of aerial movements that would have impressed professional capoeiristas. Her body was covered in a light sheen of sweat, her breathing controlled despite the intensity of her workout. She felt more centered than she had in weeks, more connected to the part of herself that existed beyond the daily struggles of adaptation and survival. As she gathered her belongings and prepared to leave, she had no idea that her private sanctuary was about to become a public battleground. The next morning brought the official announcement about talent show auditions, posted on bulletin boards throughout Lincoln High with the kind of fanfare usually reserved for major sporting events. Students clustered around the notices, reading through requirements and deadlines while discussing their planned performances in excited whispers. The talent show was more than entertainment at Lincoln High. It was a social event that could elevate or destroy reputations, launch new friendships, and solidify or challenge existing power structures. Maya studied the announcement with genuine interest, her mind already working through possibilities. She had never performed capoeira for an audience outside her family and fellow practitioners, but the idea of sharing her culture with her new school community felt both terrifying and exciting. The art form that had sustained her through her darkest months could finally serve a purpose beyond personal healing. Perhaps this was how she could find her place at Lincoln High, by offering something beautiful and authentic that no one else could provide. Chloe Bennett also stood before the bulletin board, but her focus was entirely different. She wasn't reading about requirements or deadlines. She was studying the faces of potential competitors, calculating threats and planning strategy. When she noticed Maya among the interested students, her smile was sharp and predatory. The talent show was Chloe's domain, her annual coronation, and she had no intention of allowing an outsider to disrupt the natural order of things. As Maya walked to her next class, she felt a hand touch her shoulder. Emma Chen, a quiet girl from her biology class, had been watching her with curious eyes for weeks. Emma was one of the few Asian students at Lincoln High, which created its own set of social challenges, and she recognized something familiar in Maya's careful navigation of the school's social landscape. Her approach was tentative but genuine, the first real offer of friendship Maya had received since arriving in Riverside Falls. Emma asked about Maya's interest in the talent show, her question opening the door to the first real conversation Maya had enjoyed with a peer in months. They discovered shared experiences of feeling like outsiders, of carrying cultural identities that didn't quite fit the Lincoln High mold, of finding strength in traditions that their classmates couldn't understand. When Maya mentioned her capoeira background, Emma's eyes lit up with genuine fascination, rather than the polite confusion she usually encountered. Their conversation was interrupted by the sharp sound of heels on linoleum. Chloe approached with Madison and Sophia in tow, their formation instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with Lincoln High's social dynamics. Emma's body language shifted immediately, her shoulders tensing as she prepared for whatever interaction was about to unfold. She had witnessed Chloe's campaigns against other students and recognized the predatory gleam in the queen bee's eyes. Chloe's greeting was warm and inclusive, her tone suggesting genuine friendliness as she inserted herself into their conversation. She expressed enthusiasm about Maya's potential participation in the talent show, claiming that the event always benefited from diverse perspectives and fresh talent. Her words were perfectly chosen, politically correct, and socially acceptable, but Emma caught the subtle edge beneath the surface. Maya, still learning to read the complex social signals that governed American high school interactions, accepted the comments at face value. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Chloe skillfully extracting information about Maya's planned performance while appearing to offer encouragement and support. She learned about Maya's capoeira background, her years of training, and her emotional connection to the art form. Madison and Sophia contributed strategic compliments and questions, their technique polished through years of information gathering, disguised as friendly interest. When the girls finally parted ways, Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the school's aggressive air conditioning. She had watched Chloe Bennett operate for 3 years and recognized the beginning stages of a campaign. Maya, focused on the genuine excitement of potentially sharing her culture with her new community, missed the warning signs entirely. She walked to her next class energized by the possibility that she might finally find her place at Lincoln High, unaware that she had just provided her enemies with the exact information they needed to destroy her. That evening, Maya sat in her small bedroom above Café Brasilia, surrounded by the sounds and smells of her aunt's work below. The apartment was modest but warm, filled with photographs and artifacts that connected them to the life they had left behind in Brazil. Maya studied for her classes while the rhythm of samba music drifted up through the floorboards, mixing with the aroma of coffee and freshly baked pão de açúcar. Aunt Carmen knocked softly on her door, entering with a cup of guarana and the tired smile of someone who had spent another long day serving coffee to customers who barely acknowledged her humanity. She asked about Maya's day, her English heavily accented but clear, her concern evident in the way she studied her niece's face for signs of trouble. Maya told her about the talent show opportunity, watching as her aunt's expression shifted from concern to something approaching pride. Carmen remembered Maya's father teaching capoeira in São Paulo, remembered the way his daughter had moved even as a small child, with a natural grace that suggested deep understanding of the art form's spiritual dimensions. She had worried that Maya's connection to her heritage would fade in America, that the practical demands of survival would overwhelm the cultural traditions that defined their family's identity. The possibility that Maya might share capoeira with her new community felt like a bridge between worlds, a way to honor the past while building a future. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the cafe's door chime, followed by voices from below. Carmen sighed, recognizing the tone of customers who expected service regardless of posted hours, and excused herself to handle whatever crisis awaited. Maya remained in her room, her textbooks forgotten as she imagined herself performing capoeira on the Lincoln High stage, sharing the beauty and history of her culture with an audience that might finally see her as more than just another foreign student. 3 blocks away, Chloe Bennett sat in her perfectly decorated bedroom, surrounded by the luxury that defined her family's social status. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends and admirers, but her attention was focused on a different kind of communication. Madison and Sophia had joined her for what they called a strategy session, their annual pre-talent show planning meeting, where they identified potential threats and developed appropriate responses. Maya's name topped their list this year, marked with detailed notes about her background, her strengths, and most importantly, her vulnerabilities. They had done their research, utilizing the school's informal intelligence network of students who traded social acceptance for information. Tyler Kim's observations had proven particularly valuable, providing insights into Maya's practice routine and emotional investment in her planned performance. The 3 girls understood that direct confrontation would be counterproductive, potentially generating sympathy for Maya while making them appear threatened by her presence. Instead, they needed a subtler approach, something that would undermine Maya's confidence while maintaining their own reputations as supportive classmates. The key was making Maya doubt herself, convincing her that participation in the talent show would result in humiliation and social suicide. Their plan began to take shape as the evening progressed, each girl contributing suggestions refined through years of psychological warfare disguised as teenage friendship. They would need to move carefully, timing their interventions to maximize impact while minimizing the risk of adult interference. Maya Rodriguez was about to discover that surviving high school required more than academic achievement and cultural pride. It demanded the ability to recognize and defend against enemies who hid behind smiles. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of Lincoln High as Maya walked through the main entrance, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her head held high despite the growing weight of curious stares. 3 weeks had passed since her English presentation, and she had begun to notice subtle shifts in the way other students interacted with her. Conversations would pause when she approached groups in the hallway, then resume in hushed tones after she passed. The cafeteria seemed to develop invisible barriers around empty seats near her usual solitary table. Even teachers appeared to study her with renewed interest, as if trying to solve a puzzle they hadn't realized existed. Emma Chen had become Maya's closest friend at Lincoln High, though their relationship remained cautious and tentative. They shared lunch periods and study sessions, finding comfort in their mutual status as cultural outsiders navigating the complex social ecosystem of American high school life. Emma's family had immigrated from Taiwan when she was 8, giving her years of experience in the delicate balance between maintaining cultural identity and achieving social acceptance. She recognized the warning signs of social targeting that Maya had yet to learn to identify. During their Tuesday lunch period, Emma noticed Madison Clark lingering near their table longer than necessary. Her attention seemingly focused on organizing papers for student council, but her ears obviously tuned to their conversation. Maya was describing her weekend practice session with enthusiasm, explaining how she had finally mastered a particularly challenging sequence that combined defensive movements with counterattack possibilities. Her face glowed with the kind of joy that came from physical accomplishment and spiritual connection, her hands moving gracefully as she demonstrated basic positions. Emma interrupted Maya's demonstration with a gentle touch on her arm, nodding meaningfully toward Madison's obvious eavesdropping. Maya followed her gaze and offered Madison a friendly smile, completely misreading the situation as casual interest rather than intelligence gathering. Madison responded with practiced warmth, approaching their table with the confident stride of someone accustomed to inserting herself into any conversation she deemed worthy of her attention. Madison's questions appeared innocent enough on the surface, focused on Maya's cultural background and her experiences adjusting to life in North Carolina. She expressed admiration for students who maintained connections to their heritage while embracing American opportunities, her words carefully chosen to sound supportive and inclusive. Maya responded openly, grateful for what seemed like genuine interest from someone in Chloe's inner circle, interpreting Madison's attention as a positive sign that her social integration was progressing successfully. The conversation gradually shifted toward the upcoming talent show, with Madison expressing excitement about the diversity of planned performances. She mentioned that Chloe was working on something spectacular for her 4th consecutive victory, describing elaborate costumes and professional choreography that had been months in the planning. Maya listened politely, offering appropriate compliments, while internally comparing her simple capoeira demonstration to the kind of production values Madison was describing. Emma watched the exchange with growing unease, recognizing the subtle psychological warfare that Madison specialized in deploying. The redhead was systematically establishing Chloe's superiority while undermining Maya's confidence, creating doubt without appearing to criticize or discourage. Her technique was masterful, combining apparent support with carefully placed seeds of insecurity that would grow and flourish in Maya's mind over the coming days. When Madison finally excused herself to return to her student council responsibilities, Maya's enthusiasm about the talent show had noticeably diminished. She continued eating her lunch in thoughtful silence, processing the information she had received about the competition's expected caliber and her own relatively simple planned performance. Emma attempted to restore her friend's confidence by pointing out that authenticity often resonated more deeply with audiences than elaborate production values, but the damage had already been done. That afternoon's biology class provided another opportunity for subtle manipulation, as Sophia Taylor found herself assigned to Maya's lab group for a project analyzing genetic inheritance patterns in fruit flies. Sophia's approach differed from Madison's direct information gathering, focusing instead on building false intimacy through shared confidences and carefully manufactured vulnerability. She confided her own insecurities about fitting in at Lincoln High despite her apparent social success, creating an atmosphere of mutual understanding that encouraged Maya to lower her emotional defenses. Sophia's performance was flawless, combining genuine-seeming empathy with strategic emotional manipulation that left Maya feeling understood and supported. She spoke about the pressure of maintaining appearances, the exhaustion of constant social performance, and the fear of making mistakes that could destroy carefully constructed reputations. Maya found herself reciprocating with her own fears about the talent show, admitting that she sometimes felt overwhelmed by the prospect of performing her cultural heritage for an audience that might not understand or appreciate its significance. The conversation continued after class as they walked toward their lockers, with Sophia offering reassurance and encouragement that felt genuine but served to extract additional information about Maya's emotional state and preparation process. She learned about Maya's practice schedule, her perfectionist tendencies, and most importantly, her deep emotional investment in representing her culture accurately and respectfully. Armed with this intelligence, Sophia could help craft interventions designed to exploit Maya's greatest vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, Tyler Kim continued his unofficial surveillance from the computer lab, his fascination with Maya's practice sessions growing stronger with each observation. He had begun researching Capoeira online, discovering its rich history and cultural significance, developing an appreciation for the art form that went beyond mere curiosity. His technical skills allowed him to access the school's security camera system, providing better angles and higher quality footage of Maya's afternoon training sessions. Tyler's recordings were initially intended for his own viewing pleasure, a way to study and appreciate an art form he found mesmerizing. However, his collection of footage represented a potential goldmine of intelligence for anyone seeking to understand Maya's abilities, techniques, and emotional investment in her practice. His quiet, unobtrusive presence throughout the school made him an ideal information source, though he remained unaware that his observations had commercial value in Lincoln High's social marketplace. The first direct assault on Maya's confidence came Thursday morning in the form of an anonymous note, slipped through her locker vents overnight. The message was brief but devastating, written in block letters that prevented handwriting identification. It suggested that her planned talent show performance would embarrass not only herself, but also the Brazilian community she claimed to represent. Questioning whether a teenage girl could adequately convey the cultural significance of such a complex art form. Maya's hands trembled as she read the note, her stomach clenching with anxiety that seemed to radiate through her entire body. The words struck directly at her deepest fear, the possibility that her performance might be seen as appropriation rather than appreciation, that her youth and inexperience might diminish rather than honor her father's teachings. She folded the note carefully and placed it in her backpack, unwilling to throw it away but unable to display it where others might see her distress. Emma found Maya sitting alone in the library during their free period, staring blankly at an open textbook, while her mind obviously processed something far removed from academic material. Her usual animated energy had been replaced by a subdued melancholy that worried Emma deeply. When pressed for explanation, Maya reluctantly shared the contents of the anonymous note, watching as Emma's expression shifted from confusion to anger to protective determination. Emma immediately recognized the note as part of a coordinated campaign, pointing out that anonymous harassment rarely occurred in isolation at Lincoln High. She urged Maya to report the incident to school administrators, but Maya resisted, afraid that involving adults would only escalate whatever conflict was developing around her. Her experience in São Paulo had taught her that authority figures often complicated situations rather than resolving them, particularly when cultural misunderstandings were involved. Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Johnson, the drama teacher who coordinated the annual talent show. His presence in the library was unusual, as he typically spent free periods in the theater working on set construction or reviewing audition materials. He approached Maya with apparent casualness, but Emma immediately suspected that his timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Mr. Johnson expressed enthusiasm about Maya's planned participation in the talent show, mentioning that he had heard wonderful things about her cultural background and artistic abilities. However, his conversation gradually shifted toward logistical concerns about performance complexity and safety regulations. He explained that certain types of physical demonstrations required additional insurance coverage and administrative approval, particularly those involving martial arts elements or acrobatic movements. Maya listened with growing alarm as Mr. Johnson outlined the bureaucratic obstacles that could potentially complicate her performance. While he stressed that these requirements were standard safety measures rather than attempts to discourage participation, the effect was to introduce doubt about whether her capoeira demonstration would be feasible within the show's constraints. She began to worry that her planned performance might be too complicated, too risky, or too culturally specific for Lincoln High's talent show format. Emma watched the interaction with barely concealed fury, recognizing Mr. Johnson's visit as another carefully orchestrated element in the campaign against Maya. The drama teacher's concerns were valid, but suspiciously well-timed, arriving precisely when Maya's confidence was already shaken by the anonymous note. The coordination required for such precise timing suggested a level of planning and communication that extended beyond student-level social warfare. After Mr. Johnson left to return to his theater duties, Maya sat in stunned silence, processing the cumulative impact of the morning's events. The anonymous note had attacked her cultural authenticity, while the teacher's visit had introduced practical obstacles that might make participation impossible. Emma attempted to provide perspective, pointing out that both incidents could be coincidental rather than coordinated, but Maya's trust in her social environment had been fundamentally shaken. That evening, Maya practiced her capoeira forms in the gymnasium with desperate intensity, as if physical perfection could overcome the psychological warfare being waged against her participation in the talent show. Her movements were sharper than usual. Driven by anxiety rather than joy, her usual flowing grace replaced by mechanical precision that lacked the spiritual connection that made capoeira beautiful. She repeated sequences until her muscles ached, pushing her body beyond its normal limits in an attempt to prove to herself that she was ready for public performance. Tyler Kim watched from his usual observation post, noting the change in Maya's practice style with concern that surprised him. His weeks of surveillance had given him insight into her normal rhythms and emotional states, allowing him to recognize when something was troubling her. The tension in her movements suggested internal conflict that had nothing to do with technical preparation, indicating external pressures that were affecting her mental state. Unknown to Tyler, his footage of Maya's practice sessions had already been reviewed by Madison Clark, who had convinced him to share his recordings under the pretense of creating a promotional video celebrating cultural diversity at Lincoln High. Tyler's trusting nature and desire for social acceptance had made him an easy target for manipulation, and Madison's technical skills allowed her to copy his files without his knowledge or consent. Madison's analysis of Tyler's footage revealed weaknesses in Maya's technique that could be exploited through carefully timed psychological pressure. She identified moments of uncertainty in complex sequences, noted Maya's tendency toward perfectionism, and cataloged the emotional investment that made criticism particularly devastating. This intelligence would prove invaluable in planning future interventions designed to destroy Maya's confidence before the talent show auditions. Friday morning brought another anonymous note, this one questioning Maya's motives for participating in the talent show and suggesting that she was using her cultural heritage as a gimmick to gain attention and sympathy. The message was more sophisticated than the first, demonstrating knowledge of Maya's background and family circumstances that could only have come from someone with access to detailed personal information. The writer specifically mentioned her parents' death and her aunt's financial struggles, using these painful realities as weapons against Maya's self-esteem. Maya's reaction to the second note was more intense than her response to the first, combining grief, anger, and profound betrayal into an emotional cocktail that left her shaking with suppressed fury. Someone at Lincoln High had researched her personal history and weaponized her greatest losses against her artistic aspirations. The violation felt deeper than simple bullying, striking at the core of her identity and her connection to her deceased father's teachings. Emma found Maya crying in the girls' bathroom during second period, her usually composed demeanor completely shattered by the morning's assault on her emotional stability. The second note had accomplished what the first had failed to achieve, breaking through Maya's protective barriers and exposing the raw grief that still dominated her internal landscape. Emma held her friend while she sobbed, offering comfort while internally planning her own investigation into the source of the harassment. The bathroom door opened to admit Chloe Bennett, whose arrival seemed perfectly timed to witness Maya's emotional breakdown. Chloe's expression combined surprise, concern, and barely concealed satisfaction as she took in the scene before her. She offered assistance with apparent sincerity, asking if there was anything she could do to help and expressing shock that someone would target Maya with anonymous harassment. Maya's vulnerability in that moment made her desperate for support from any source, even someone she barely knew. She found herself accepting Chloe's offer of help, grateful for what appeared to be genuine concern from one of Lincoln High's most influential students. Chloe listened to Maya's explanation of the anonymous notes with appropriate outrage, promising to use her social connections to identify and stop whoever was responsible for the harassment. Emma watched this interaction with growing alarm, recognizing Chloe's performance as masterfully manipulative. The Queen Bee was positioning herself as Maya's protector, while simultaneously gathering intelligence about the campaign's effectiveness. Her expressions of concern were perfectly calibrated to appear genuine, while her questions extracted maximum information about Maya's emotional state and defensive strategies. Chloe's offer to help investigate the anonymous notes was particularly insidious, as it positioned her as an ally while giving her control over any potential discovery process. She could now direct suspicion away from herself and her associates, while maintaining the appearance of actively seeking justice for Maya's harassment. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated enough to fool someone in Maya's emotionally compromised state, but transparent to anyone analyzing it objectively. When the girls finally parted ways, Maya felt marginally better about her situation, bolstered by Chloe's apparent support and promises of assistance. Emma, however, was more convinced than ever that Maya was being systematically targeted by a coordinated campaign designed to eliminate her as competition in the talent show. The precision and timing of each assault suggested professional-level psychological warfare rather than random teenage cruelty. That afternoon's practice session was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of several students who claimed to be researching cultural performances for a sociology project. Madison Clark led the group, which included 2 junior girls that Maya didn't recognize, and Tyler Kim, whose presence seemed awkward and reluctant. They requested permission to observe and record Maya's practice for educational purposes, presenting the request as an honor that recognized her expertise and cultural knowledge. Maya's recent emotional trauma made her eager for any form of positive recognition, and she agreed to the observation despite feeling uncomfortable with the sudden attention. Her performance under scrutiny lacked the natural flow that characterized her private sessions, as self-consciousness replaced the meditative state that normally guided her movements. The observers took extensive notes and recordings, asking questions that seemed designed to highlight technical imperfections rather than appreciate cultural significance. Madison's questions were particularly pointed, focusing on the martial aspects of capoeira while downplaying its artistic and spiritual dimensions. She asked about the potential for injury during performance, the difficulty of mastering complex movements, and the years of training required to achieve competency. Her apparent fascination with the art form served to emphasize how challenging it would be for someone of Maya's age and experience level to perform adequately for a general audience. Tyler Kim remained largely silent during the observation, his discomfort with the situation evident in his body language and reluctant participation. He recognized that his presence was being used to legitimize what felt increasingly like an interrogation rather than educational research. His growing understanding of Maya's harassment situation made him uncomfortable with his role in what appeared to be another form of psychological pressure. The session concluded with Madison expressing amazement at capoeira's complexity and difficulty, commenting that it must take decades to achieve the level of mastery required for public performance. Her words were carefully chosen to sound complimentary while reinforcing Maya's insecurities about her readiness for the talent show. The other observers echoed Madison's sentiments, creating a chorus of apparent admiration that actually served to undermine Maya's confidence. After the group departed, Maya continued practicing alone, but her movements remained stiff and uncertain. The observation session had transformed her private sanctuary into a space of judgment and evaluation, poisoning the refuge where she had previously found peace and connection to her cultural heritage. Her father's teachings, which had once felt like natural extensions of her body and spirit, now seemed foreign and inadequate under the weight of external scrutiny. Emma arrived at the gymnasium just as Maya was gathering her belongings, recognizing immediately that something had disturbed her friend's usual post-practice tranquility. Maya explained the afternoon's events with forced enthusiasm, describing the observation session as positive recognition of her cultural knowledge. However, her body language and emotional energy suggested that the experience had been more draining than empowering. Emma's suspicions about coordinated harassment crystallized into certainty as Maya described Madison's role in organizing the observation session. The timing was too perfect, the questions too specifically designed to create doubt, and the overall effect too precisely targeted at Maya's vulnerabilities to be coincidental. She realized that Maya was being subjected to a sophisticated psychological campaign that extended far beyond simple anonymous notes. The weekend provided temporary respite from Lincoln High's social pressures, but Maya found herself unable to escape the doubts that had been planted throughout the week. Her practice sessions in the small space above Café Brasilia felt cramped and inadequate compared to the gymnasium's expansive floor, making her acutely aware of the spatial limitations that might affect her talent show performance. Aunt Carmen noticed her niece's decreased enthusiasm and increased anxiety, but Maya deflected her concerns with reassurances that everything was progressing normally. Maya spent hours researching talent show performances online, studying videos of high school competitions that showcased elaborate productions and professional-level performances. Each video reinforced the doubts that Madison had planted about the adequacy of a simple capoeira demonstration, making Maya increasingly aware of the gap between her planned performance and the spectacle that audiences apparently expected from talent show participants. Sunday evening brought a phone call that would escalate the psychological warfare to a new level. The caller identified herself as a reporter from the Riverside Falls Gazette, claiming to be researching a story about cultural diversity in local schools. She asked Maya detailed questions about her immigration story, her family's circumstances, and her planned talent show performance, presenting the interview as an opportunity for positive publicity about Lincoln High's inclusive environment. Maya answered the questions honestly, grateful for what appeared to be recognition of her cultural contributions to the school community. The reporter seemed particularly interested in the circumstances that had brought Maya to North Carolina, asking probing questions about her parents' death and her aunt's financial situation. Maya found herself sharing more personal information than she had intended, caught up in the apparent legitimacy of the interview process. The call concluded with the reporter promising to contact Maya before publication to verify quotes and provide an opportunity for final comments. Maya felt excited about the prospect of positive media coverage that might help other immigrant students feel welcome at Lincoln High. She went to bed that night feeling more optimistic about her situation than she had since the anonymous notes began appearing. However, no such reporter existed, and no story was being prepared for publication. The phone call had been another element in the campaign against Maya, designed to extract personal information that could be used to devastating effect in future psychological attacks. The conversation had been recorded, providing ammunition for further harassment that would strike directly at Maya's most painful vulnerabilities. Monday morning would bring new challenges that would test Maya's resilience to its absolute limits, as the campaign against her participation in the talent show entered its most vicious phase. The psychological foundation work had been completed, leaving Maya isolated, doubting herself, and emotionally vulnerable to the devastating assault that Chloe Bennett and her associates were preparing to unleash. The battle for Lincoln High's talent show was about to become a war for Maya's very identity and sense of self-worth. Monday morning arrived with an unseasonable chill that seemed to permeate every corner of Lincoln High, creating an atmosphere of tension that Maya felt the moment she stepped through the main entrance. Students clustered in their usual groups throughout the hallway, but their conversations carried an undercurrent of excitement and anticipation that suggested something significant was brewing beneath the surface of normal teenage social dynamics. Maya navigated through the crowded corridor with growing unease, sensing that she had somehow become the focal point of attention she had never sought. The first sign of trouble materialized at her locker in the form of a printed flyer that had been taped to the metal surface overnight. The document appeared to be a professional newsletter article about cultural appropriation in educational settings, complete with academic citations and expert quotes about the dangers of allowing untrained individuals to represent complex cultural traditions. Maya's hands trembled as she read the carefully crafted piece, recognizing her own situation described in clinical terms that made her planned talent show performance sound like an act of cultural vandalism rather than heartfelt tribute. The article's anonymous author had constructed a devastating argument against Maya's participation without mentioning her by name, using general principles of cultural sensitivity to suggest that teenage students lacked the maturity and training necessary to adequately represent their heritage in public forums. The piece specifically criticized performances that reduced rich cultural traditions to entertainment spectacles, arguing that such displays often reinforced stereotypes and misconceptions rather than promoting genuine understanding. Emma discovered Maya standing frozen in front of her locker, the offensive flyer clutched in her hands while tears of frustration and confusion streamed down her cheeks. The psychological assault had escalated beyond anonymous notes to sophisticated propaganda designed to make Maya question not just her readiness for performance, but her very right to share her cultural heritage with others. The attack struck at the core of her identity, transforming her pride in her Brazilian roots into a source of shame and self-doubt. Several other students had gathered to observe Maya's distress, their presence creating a circle of witnesses that amplified her humiliation and vulnerability. Emma quickly ushered her friend away from the growing crowd, leading her toward the relative privacy of an empty classroom where they could process the morning's devastating development without additional public scrutiny. The damage, however, had already been done, as word of Maya's emotional breakdown spread through Lincoln High's efficient gossip network with remarkable speed. Chloe Bennett learned of the flyer incident within minutes of its discovery, receiving detailed reports from multiple sources about Maya's reaction and the document's contents. Her satisfaction was carefully concealed behind an expression of shocked concern as she discussed the situation with Madison and Sophia during their morning strategy session in the student council office. The flyer represented a significant escalation in their campaign, moving beyond personal harassment to intellectual arguments that would be difficult for Maya to counter without appearing defensive or unreasonable. Madison had spent considerable time crafting the pseudo-academic article, drawing on her advanced placement courses in psychology and sociology to create content that sounded authoritative while serving their specific agenda. The piece had been designed to appear as legitimate educational material that someone might genuinely distribute to promote cultural sensitivity, making it nearly impossible to trace back to its actual authors or prove malicious intent. Sophia contributed her own insights about the flyer's likely psychological impact, predicting that Maya would respond by withdrawing from the talent show rather than risk being perceived as culturally insensitive or appropriative. The combination of academic-sounding criticism with Maya's existing insecurities about representing her heritage adequately created a perfect storm of self-doubt that would be extremely difficult to overcome through rational argument or emotional support. Their conversation was interrupted by Tyler Kim's hesitant appearance at the student council office door, his expression troubled, and his usual quiet demeanor replaced by obvious internal conflict. Tyler had spent the weekend reviewing his recordings of Maya's practice sessions, studying her technique, and researching Capoeira's history and cultural significance. His growing understanding of the art form's complexity and Maya's genuine skill had created cognitive dissonance with his involvement in what he now recognized as a deliberate campaign of harassment. Tyler's request for a private conversation with Madison surprised the three girls, who had never considered him capable of independent thought or moral reflection. His usual compliance with their requests for information and assistance had been so reliable that they had forgotten he possessed his own conscience and capacity for judgment. Madison agreed to speak with him privately, curious about what might have prompted this unprecedented assertion of agency from their typically passive accomplice. The conversation that followed in the hallway outside the student council office revealed Tyler's growing discomfort with his role in the campaign against Maya. He expressed concern about the escalating nature of the harassment, questioning whether their actions had crossed ethical boundaries that he was unwilling to continue supporting. His technical skills had made him valuable to their operation, but his moral awakening threatened to expose their entire conspiracy. Madison's response combined reassurance with subtle intimidation, reminding Tyler of his own social vulnerabilities and the protection that their association provided him within Lincoln High's complex social hierarchy. She reframed their campaign as legitimate competition preparation, suggesting that Maya needed to understand the realities of performing in a competitive environment before embarrassing herself publicly. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated enough to create doubt in Tyler's mind about his own moral instincts. Meanwhile, Maya struggled through her morning classes with diminished concentration and emotional energy, the flyer's accusations echoing in her mind despite Emma's attempts to provide rational perspective on the situation. Her teachers noticed her distraction, but attributed it to normal teenage stress rather than recognizing signs of systematic harassment. The isolation created by her inability to explain her situation to authority figures intensified her feelings of helplessness and vulnerability. During lunch period, Maya attempted to find solace in the library's quiet atmosphere, hoping to research responses to the cultural appropriation arguments that had shaken her confidence so profoundly. Her search through academic databases and cultural studies materials revealed legitimate concerns about superficial cultural aid representation, but also found numerous examples of young people successfully sharing their heritage through performance and artistic expression. The research process gradually restored some of Maya's intellectual confidence, as she discovered scholarly articles that supported her right to represent her own cultural background regardless of her age or training level. Several sources specifically addressed the difference between appropriation by outsiders and authentic expression by cultural inheritors, providing Maya with theoretical ammunition to counter the flyer's accusations. Her growing sense of empowerment was shattered by the arrival of Mr. Johnson, who approached her library table with an expression of serious concern that immediately triggered Maya's anxiety responses. The drama teacher explained that he had received several anonymous complaints about her planned talent show performance, expressing worry about potential controversy surrounding cultural sensitivity issues. His words echoed the flyer's arguments with such precision that Maya realized the morning's propaganda had already influenced school administrators. Mr. Johnson's concerns focused on the school's liability in the event of negative community reaction to Maya's performance, suggesting that Lincoln High needed to avoid any appearance of promoting cultural insensitivity or stereotyping. He stressed that his questions arose from administrative necessity rather than personal doubt about Maya's abilities or intentions, but the effect was to create official pressure for her to reconsider her participation in the talent show. The conversation continued for nearly 20 minutes, with Mr. Johnson outlining various bureaucratic obstacles that could complicate Maya's performance, while maintaining that he personally supported cultural diversity and student expression. Maya found herself defending not just her artistic choices, but her fundamental right to share her own heritage, a position she had never imagined needing to argue within an educational environment. Emma discovered Maya in the library after the drama teacher's departure, finding her friend in a state of emotional exhaustion that went beyond simple disappointment or frustration. The morning's accumulated assaults on her identity and artistic aspirations had left Maya questioning everything she thought she knew about her place in American society and her right to maintain connections to her Brazilian heritage. Their discussion was overheard by several other students who had positioned themselves strategically throughout the library, creating the impression of coincidental proximity while actually conducting surveillance for Chloe's intelligence network. The information gathered about Maya's emotional state and defensive strategies would be crucial for planning the campaign's next phase, which was designed to deliver a knockout blow to any remaining resistance Maya might mount. That afternoon's biology class provided another opportunity for psychological manipulation, as Sophia Taylor engineered a discussion about cultural identity and assimilation during their group project on genetic diversity. Her comments appeared to support multicultural understanding while actually reinforcing the arguments from the morning's flyer, suggesting that maintaining cultural traditions required deeper knowledge and training than most young people possessed. Sophia's technique was particularly insidious because it combined apparent empathy with intellectual arguments that made Maya's position seem naive and uninformed. She shared fictional examples of cultural performances that had gone wrong due to inadequate preparation, creating fears about potential humiliation that went beyond simple performance anxiety to encompass broader concerns about cultural responsibility and community representation. The conversation attracted attention from other students in the biology class, several of whom contributed their own opinions about cultural appropriation and the responsibilities of immigrant communities to represent their heritage accurately. Maya found herself defending her planned performance to an increasingly hostile audience that questioned her motives, her qualifications, and her understanding of the potential consequences of public cultural expression. Maya's responses became increasingly defensive and emotional as the discussion continued, providing exactly the kind of public vulnerability that Chloe's campaign was designed to create. Students throughout the classroom witnessed Maya's distress while absorbing arguments against her talent show participation that would be repeated and amplified throughout Lincoln High's social networks over the coming hours. After school, Maya retreated to the gymnasium for her usual practice session, hoping that physical movement and spiritual connection to her father's teachings might restore some sense of inner peace and cultural confidence. However, the space that had previously served as sanctuary now felt contaminated by the day's accumulated psychological assaults, making it difficult for her to achieve the meditative state that usually accompanied her capoeira practice. Her movements were tentative and uncertain, lacking the flowing confidence that had characterized her previous sessions as she second-guessed every technique and questioned every artistic choice. The flyer's arguments about cultural appropriation had infected her relationship with her own heritage, creating doubt where there had previously been pride and connection. She found herself analyzing each movement for potential misrepresentation or stereotyping, destroying the natural rhythm that made capoeira beautiful and meaningful. Tyler Kim observed Maya's troubled practice session from his usual vantage point in the computer lab, noting the dramatic change in her physical and emotional energy with growing concern for his role in creating her distress. His recordings of previous sessions had been used to identify weaknesses that were now being exploited through systematic psychological warfare, making him complicit in what he increasingly recognized as a cruel and unnecessary campaign. The internal conflict between his desire for social acceptance and his growing moral revulsion created a psychological crisis that Tyler had never experienced before in his carefully controlled and predictable existence. His technical skills had made him valuable to Madison's operation, but his emerging conscience demanded that he consider the human cost of their collaborative efforts to destroy Maya's confidence and eliminate her as competition. Tuesday morning brought a new form of assault in the shape of social media posts that appeared to celebrate cultural diversity while actually undermining Maya's specific situation. Several anonymous accounts had been created to share articles and opinions about the importance of authentic cultural representation, using hashtags and language that seemed supportive while reinforcing arguments against untrained young people attempting to represent complex traditions. The posts were sophisticated enough to appear as genuine activism rather than targeted harassment, making them difficult to report or counter without seeming to oppose legitimate concerns about cultural sensitivity. Maya discovered the social media campaign through Emma, who had been monitoring online discussions about their school and noticed the suspicious timing and content of the posts related to cultural appropriation in educational settings. The psychological impact of seeing her situation discussed and debated by anonymous online voices was devastating for Maya, who realized that the campaign against her had expanded beyond the confines of Lincoln High to potentially include participants from throughout the community. The anonymity of the social media attacks made it impossible to identify or confront her critics, creating a sense of powerlessness that amplified all her existing fears and insecurities. Emma's attempts to provide perspective and support were hampered by her own growing recognition that Maya was facing a level of sophisticated harassment that exceeded typical teenage social conflict. The coordination required to manage simultaneous attacks across multiple platforms and environments suggested adult-level planning and resources that went far beyond what high school students should be capable of organizing independently. The morning's classes passed in a blur of distraction and anxiety for Maya, who found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on academic material while processing the emotional and psychological trauma of systematic harassment. Her teachers noticed her decreased participation and performance, but lacked the training or awareness necessary to recognize signs of coordinated bullying that extended beyond traditional physical or verbal abuse. During lunch period, Maya received an unexpected invitation to join Chloe Bennett's table, presented as a gesture of support and solidarity during what Chloe described as an unfortunate misunderstanding about cultural sensitivity issues. The invitation came through Sophia, who approached Maya with apparent concern and genuine offers of assistance in dealing with the harassment that everyone now knew she was experiencing. Maya's emotional vulnerability and desperate need for allies made her receptive to what appeared to be an olive branch from Lincoln High's most powerful social group. She accepted the invitation despite Emma's obvious reluctance, hoping that association with Chloe might provide protection from further attacks, while demonstrating that she had support from influential classmates who understood and appreciated her cultural contributions. The lunch conversation was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation, with Chloe expressing outrage about the anonymous harassment while subtly reinforcing many of the same arguments that had been used to attack Maya's confidence. She positioned herself as a protector and advocate while actually gathering intelligence about Maya's emotional state and planned responses to the ongoing campaign. Chloe's apparent support included offers to help investigate the source of the anonymous attacks, promises to use her social influence to counter negative narratives about Maya's talent show participation, and suggestions for modifications to Maya's performance that might address some of the cultural sensitivity concerns that had been raised. The offers seemed generous and supportive, while actually serving to increase Chloe's control over Maya's situation and responses. Madison and Sophia contributed their own expressions of support and encouragement, sharing fictional stories about other students who had successfully overcome similar challenges, while reinforcing subtle messages about the difficulties and risks associated with cultural performance. Their technique was sophisticated enough to appear helpful while actually increasing Maya's anxiety and self-doubt about her planned participation in the talent show. The conversation concluded with Chloe inviting Maya to attend a private meeting after school where they could discuss strategies for dealing with the harassment and ensuring that her talent show performance received the respect and appreciation it deserved. Maya accepted the invitation gratefully, interpreting it as evidence that she had found powerful allies who would help her overcome the obstacles that had been placed in her path. Emma watched the lunch interaction with growing alarm, recognizing the predatory dynamics that Maya was too emotionally compromised to identify. The timing of Chloe's apparent support was too convenient to be coincidental, and the specific nature of her offers suggested intimate knowledge of the campaign's psychological strategy and intended outcomes. Emma realized that Maya was being drawn deeper into a trap that would be extremely difficult to escape without outside intervention. That afternoon's encounter in the hallway between classes provided another opportunity for psychological manipulation, as several students who had never previously acknowledged Maya's existence suddenly approached her with questions and comments about cultural appropriation and representation. The conversations appeared to arise from genuine curiosity and concern, but their timing and content suggested coordination that went beyond coincidental interest in cultural issues. The students' questions were carefully designed to highlight the complexity and potential pitfalls of cultural performance, reinforcing Maya's growing fears about inadequate preparation and possible negative consequences. Each interaction chipped away at her confidence while appearing to offer support and encouragement, creating a psychological double bind that made it impossible for her to distinguish between genuine concern and manipulative harassment. Maya's responses to these interactions became increasingly defensive and uncertain, providing visible evidence of her psychological distress that would be reported back to Chloe's intelligence network for analysis and strategic planning. The campaign's effectiveness was becoming apparent to anyone observing Maya's deteriorating emotional state and growing isolation from her normal support systems and sources of confidence. The afternoon practice session that Maya had hoped would restore her sense of cultural connection and artistic purpose was further disrupted by unexpected visitors who claimed to be researching Brazilian culture for a comparative literature project. The group included students from advanced placement courses who asked sophisticated questions about capoeira's historical development and contemporary significance, creating an academic interrogation that made Maya acutely aware of the gaps in her theoretical knowledge. The visitors' questions focused on aspects of capoeira that Maya had learned through physical practice and cultural immersion rather than academic study, highlighting areas where her experiential knowledge might appear inadequate to intellectual critics. Their apparent scholarly interest served to reinforce arguments about the complexity of cultural representation, while making Maya feel unprepared for the level of scrutiny that public performance might attract. The session concluded with the visitors expressing appreciation for Maya's willingness to share her cultural knowledge, while making comments about the years of study required to truly understand capoeira's philosophical and historical dimensions. Their words were chosen to sound respectful while actually emphasizing Maya's youth and limited formal training, creating doubt about her qualifications to represent such a complex tradition in a public forum. After the group departed, Maya attempted to continue her practice but found herself unable to recapture the spiritual connection that had previously made capoeira a source of strength and identity. The day's accumulated psychological assaults had contaminated her relationship with her own cultural heritage, transforming pride into anxiety and connection into self-doubt. Her movements became mechanical and lifeless, reflecting the emotional damage that systematic harassment had inflicted on her sense of self and cultural identity. The evening's phone call from Aunt Carmen's friend in the Brazilian community of Charlotte added another layer of complexity to Maya's situation, as word of the cultural appropriation controversy had apparently spread beyond Lincoln High to include members of the broader immigrant community. The friend expressed concern about Maya's planned performance and its potential impact on Brazilian representation in North Carolina, suggesting that young people needed to be especially careful about how they presented their heritage to American audiences. The conversation reinforced Maya's worst fears about community responsibility and the potential consequences of inadequate cultural representation, adding external pressure from her own ethnic community to the internal doubts that had been systematically cultivated by her harassers. The realization that her performance might be judged not just by Lincoln High students but by members of the Brazilian diaspora created additional anxiety that seemed insurmountable. Maya ended Tuesday evening in a state of emotional and psychological exhaustion that went far beyond normal teenage stress or performance anxiety. The coordinated campaign against her participation in the talent show had successfully undermined her confidence, isolated her from support systems, and contaminated her relationship with her own cultural heritage. The battle for her right to perform was becoming a war for her very identity and sense of belonging in both her American school community and her Brazilian cultural heritage. The stage was set for Wednesday's climactic confrontation, where all the psychological warfare of the previous days would culminate in a direct assault designed to force Maya's withdrawal from the talent show through sheer emotional devastation. Chloe Bennett's campaign had reached the point where victory seemed assured, with Maya's defenses weakened and her confidence shattered beyond apparent repair. The only question remaining was whether anyone would intervene before the final devastating blow destroyed Maya's connection to her cultural identity permanently. Wednesday morning descended upon Lincoln High like a storm gathering strength, the atmosphere thick with anticipation and unspoken tension that seemed to crackle through every hallway and classroom. Maya arrived at school feeling the weight of accumulated exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders, her usually vibrant energy dimmed by nights of restless sleep and days of relentless psychological pressure. The confident young woman who had walked through these doors just weeks earlier had been systematically worn down by a campaign so sophisticated that she still couldn't fully comprehend its scope or coordination. The morning's first assault came in the form of a carefully orchestrated incident in her first-period chemistry class, where Maya found herself partnered with Jennifer Walsh, a quiet senior who had never spoken to her before but suddenly seemed intensely interested in discussing cultural identity and artistic expression. Jennifer's approach was markedly different from the aggressive tactics employed by Chloe's inner circle, utilizing subtle questioning and apparent intellectual curiosity to probe Maya's remaining defenses. Jennifer began their conversation by expressing admiration for Maya's courage in maintaining her cultural traditions while adapting to American educational environments, framing her comments as genuine respect for immigrant resilience and cultural preservation. However, her questions gradually shifted toward more challenging territory, exploring the responsibilities that came with cultural representation and the potential consequences of misrepresentation in public forums. The discussion evolved into a philosophical exploration of authenticity and cultural ownership that Jennifer seemed remarkably well prepared to navigate, citing academic sources and theoretical frameworks that Maya had never encountered in her experiential learning of capoeira. Jennifer's intellectual approach created a different kind of pressure than the emotional manipulation Maya had experienced previously, making her feel academically inadequate rather than culturally inappropriate. Maya found herself struggling to articulate the spiritual and emotional dimensions of her connection to capoeira, using the academic language that Jennifer seemed to expect, creating frustration and self-doubt about her ability to communicate the deeper significance of her planned performance. The conversation highlighted gaps in her theoretical knowledge that she had never considered problematic until faced with intellectual scrutiny that demanded scholarly rather than experiential expertise. Their chemistry experiments suffered from Maya's divided attention, resulting in poor results that Jennifer attributed to the distraction caused by their cultural discussion. The subtle implication that Maya's cultural concerns were interfering with her academic performance added another layer of psychological pressure, suggesting that her focus on the talent show was negatively impacting other aspects of her educational experience. Emma observed the interaction with growing concern, recognizing Jennifer's sophisticated questioning as another element in the coordinated campaign against Maya's participation in the talent show. The senior's sudden interest in cultural theory and Maya's specific situation was too convenient to be coincidental, particularly given her previous indifference to diversity issues and multicultural education throughout her years at Lincoln High. The conversation continued after class as Jennifer walked with Maya toward her locker, maintaining the intellectual discussion while subtly steering it toward conclusions that supported withdrawal from public cultural performance. Jennifer's arguments were sophisticated enough to seem like legitimate academic discourse, while actually reinforcing the same undermining messages that had been delivered through other channels throughout the previous days. Maya's confidence in her ability to adequately represent her cultural heritage continued to erode under Jennifer's intellectual assault, which was particularly effective because it appeared to arise from genuine scholarly interest rather than malicious intent. The academic framework made it difficult for Maya to dismiss the concerns as simple harassment, forcing her to engage with arguments that she lacked the theoretical background to counter effectively. The morning's second major incident occurred during Maya's study hall period, when she received a request to visit the guidance counselor's office for what was described as a routine check-in about her academic and social adjustment to Lincoln High. Mrs. Patterson, the school's guidance counselor, was a well-meaning woman in her 50s, whose understanding of cultural issues was limited by her own homogeneous background and traditional educational training. Mrs. Patterson's questions initially focused on Maya's academic performance and social integration, expressing concern about reports of stress and emotional difficulties that had been observed by several teachers throughout the previous week. Maya found herself in the uncomfortable position of explaining her situation without revealing the full extent of the harassment campaign, as she still hoped to resolve the conflicts without adult intervention that might escalate the situation unpredictably. The conversation gradually shifted toward the talent show, as Mrs. Patterson expressed awareness of the cultural sensitivity concerns that had been raised by anonymous community members through phone calls and emails to the school administration. Maya's heart sank as she realized that the campaign against her had expanded beyond student-level harassment to include what appeared to be adult community members expressing concerns about her planned performance. Mrs. Patterson's approach was gentle but firm, as she outlined the school's responsibility to avoid controversy that might damage Lincoln High's reputation within the broader Riverside Falls community. She stressed that her concerns arose from protective instincts rather than any doubt about Maya's abilities or cultural authenticity, but the effect was to create official pressure for Maya to reconsider her participation in the talent show. The guidance counselor suggested that Maya might consider modifying her performance to address some of the cultural sensitivity concerns that had been raised, perhaps by including educational components that would help the audience understand capoeira's historical and cultural significance. The suggestion seemed reasonable on the surface, but would have fundamentally altered the nature of Maya's planned performance, transforming an artistic expression into an academic presentation. Maya left the guidance counselor's office feeling more isolated and pressured than ever before, realizing that the campaign against her had successfully influenced school administrators, who now viewed her participation as a potential liability rather than a positive contribution to Lincoln High's cultural diversity. The institutional pressure added weight to all the personal and social pressures she had been experiencing, creating a sense of overwhelming opposition that seemed impossible to overcome. During lunch period, Maya received the invitation she had been expecting from Chloe Bennett, delivered through Madison Clark, with an appearance of urgent concern and solidarity. The message stressed that Chloe had been investigating the harassment campaign and had discovered information that Maya needed to hear immediately, framing the after-school meeting as a protective intervention rather than a potential trap. Maya's emotional vulnerability and desperate need for allies made her eager to accept any offer of help, particularly from someone with Chloe's social influence and apparent resources for investigation. Emma's attempts to counsel caution were dismissed as pessimism, as Maya convinced herself that Chloe's support could provide the solution to all her accumulated problems and pressures. The afternoon's classes passed in a haze of anticipation and anxiety, as Maya found herself looking forward to the meeting with Chloe, while simultaneously dreading what additional information might be revealed about the scope and coordination of the harassment campaign. Her ability to concentrate on academic material had been severely compromised by the emotional and psychological stress of the previous days, resulting in poor performance that her teachers attributed to normal teenage difficulties rather than systematic bullying. The final period of the day brought an unexpected encounter with Tyler Kim, who approached Maya's locker with obvious internal conflict written across his usually passive features. His presence surprised Maya, as they had never had a substantial conversation despite his peripheral involvement in some of the recent incidents that had contributed to her distress and confusion. Tyler's message was cryptic but urgent, suggesting that Maya needed to be extremely careful about trusting anyone at Lincoln High, particularly those who claimed to be investigating or helping with her harassment situation. His warning was vague enough to avoid specific accusations, but clear enough to indicate that he possessed knowledge about the campaign's true nature and coordination that could be crucial for Maya's protection. Maya's request for more specific information was met with Tyler's obvious fear and reluctance to provide details that might expose his own involvement in the conspiracy against her. His internal conflict between self-preservation and moral responsibility was evident in his stammering attempts to warn Maya without implicating himself or revealing the full scope of his knowledge about the harassment campaign's organization and leadership. The conversation was interrupted by Madison Clark's timely arrival, which Tyler seemed to view as both relief and confirmation of his fears about the dangers of disclosure. Madison's friendly greeting and apparent surprise at finding Tyler engaged in conversation with Maya served to reinforce his anxiety about the potential consequences of providing more substantial assistance or information. Tyler's departure left Maya with more questions than answers, adding another layer of confusion and paranoia to her already overwhelming situation. His warning about trusting people who claimed to be helping suggested that even apparent allies might be part of the conspiracy against her, creating doubt about everyone's motivations and making it even more difficult to distinguish between genuine support and sophisticated manipulation. After school, Maya made her way to the designated meeting location in an empty classroom that Chloe had selected for their supposedly confidential discussion about the harassment investigation. The choice of location seemed appropriate for a sensitive conversation that required privacy, though Emma's final warnings about potential traps echoed in Maya's mind as she approached the room where her fate would be decided. Chloe was already waiting when Maya arrived, accompanied by Madison and Sophia, in what was explained as necessary support for the serious revelations that were about to be shared. The three girls had arranged the classroom's desks and chairs to create an intimate discussion area that felt both welcoming and slightly claustrophobic, setting the stage for the psychological confrontation that would determine whether Maya's spirit could be completely broken. The conversation began with Chloe expressing deep concern about the escalating harassment campaign and her shock at discovering the true identity of the person responsible for orchestrating the systematic attacks on Maya's confidence and cultural identity. Her revelation that a teacher was involved in the conspiracy came as a devastating surprise that shattered Maya's remaining faith in the adults who were supposed to protect and support students. Chloe's account of her investigation portrayed Ms. Wells, a substitute teacher who occasionally worked in Lincoln High's arts department, as a bitter former professional dancer whose career had been destroyed by cultural appropriation accusations years earlier. According to Chloe's narrative, Ms. Wells had identified Maya as a target for her displaced anger about cultural sensitivity issues, using her access to student information and school resources to orchestrate the sophisticated harassment campaign. The story was compelling and detailed enough to seem credible, particularly given Maya's lack of knowledge about Ms. Wells's actual background and her desperate need for explanations that made sense of her devastating experiences. Chloe's presentation included fabricated evidence such as screenshots of emails and documents that appeared to link Ms. Wells to the anonymous notes and social media attacks that had tormented Maya throughout the previous days. Madison contributed additional details about Ms. Wells's alleged psychological profile and motivation, describing her as someone whose personal trauma had created an obsession with preventing other young people from making similar mistakes in cultural representation. The psychological explanation seemed to provide context for the campaign's sophistication and adult-level coordination, while absolving the student body of responsibility for Maya's harassment. Sophia offered her own insights about Ms. Wells' access to student records and school resources that would have enabled the level of personal information gathering that had characterized the more devastating attacks on Maya's background and family circumstances. The explanation seemed to account for details about Maya's parents' death and Aunt Carmen's financial struggles that only someone with official access could have obtained. The revelation created a profound sense of betrayal that went beyond simple student conflict to encompass institutional failure and adult manipulation that Maya felt powerless to combat or report. The apparent involvement of a teacher in her harassment campaign suggested that the educational system itself had been weaponized against her, making it impossible to seek help from other adults who might be part of the same conspiracy. Chloe's proposed solution involved a coordinated response that would expose Ms. Wells' alleged campaign while protecting Maya from further harassment and retaliation. The plan required Maya to document additional evidence through controlled interactions with the substitute teacher, creating opportunities for recording conversations, and gathering proof that could be presented to school administrators for official action. The strategy seemed reasonable and empowering, offering Maya a chance to fight back against her tormentor while providing the support and resources she needed to succeed. Chloe's apparent expertise in investigation and documentation suggested that she had the skills and connections necessary to build a case that would result in Ms. Wells' removal and Maya's vindication. However, the plan also required Maya to continue enduring harassment and psychological pressure while gathering evidence, prolonging her suffering, while risking additional emotional damage from continued exposure to the alleged perpetrator. The strategy seemed designed to extract maximum psychological trauma from Maya, while positioning Chloe as her savior and protector in the eventual resolution. Maya's acceptance of Chloe's plan represented a complete surrender of her own agency and judgment, placing her future entirely in the hands of someone whose actual motivations remained hidden behind a facade of concern and support. The elaborate deception required sophisticated planning and coordination that exceeded even the harassment campaign itself, demonstrating a level of psychological manipulation that approached professional competence. The meeting concluded with Chloe scheduling additional sessions where they would refine their strategy and prepare Maya for the evidence-gathering phase of their response to Ms. Wells' alleged harassment campaign. Maya left the classroom feeling simultaneously hopeful about finally identifying her tormentor and terrified about the continuing psychological pressure she would need to endure while building their case. Emma was waiting outside the school building when Maya emerged from her meeting with Chloe, her expression reflecting the anxiety she had been experiencing throughout the afternoon about her friend's safety and judgment. Maya's excited account of Chloe's revelations and proposed solution failed to alleviate Emma's concerns, which had only intensified during the hours of waiting and worrying about the meeting's potential outcomes. Emma's questions about the evidence and logic of Chloe's accusations revealed inconsistencies and implausibilities that Maya was too emotionally invested to recognize, highlighting the desperate nature of her need to believe in a solution that would end her suffering. The conversation became tense, as Emma's skepticism clashed with Maya's determination to trust the only person who seemed willing and able to help her fight back against her harassment. The walk home was marked by growing conflict between the two friends, as Emma's protective instincts and analytical thinking collided with Maya's emotional vulnerability and desperate hope for resolution. Maya's increasing dependence on Chloe's support created distance from her oldest ally at Lincoln High, isolating her further within the very conspiracy that sought to destroy her confidence and eliminate her as competition. That evening's practice session in the gymnasium was observed once again by Tyler Kim, whose internal conflict had reached a breaking point after witnessing Maya's meeting with Chloe and recognizing the final phase of the conspiracy he had helped enable. His recordings of Maya's practice sessions had been crucial intelligence for the campaign against her, making him complicit in psychological warfare that had escalated far beyond his original expectations or comfort level. Maya's movements during the practice session reflected the emotional and psychological trauma of her recent experiences, lacking the flowing grace and spiritual connection that had characterized her earlier training. The systematic harassment had contaminated her relationship with Capoeira itself, transforming her cultural heritage from a source of strength into a reminder of vulnerability and inadequacy. Tyler's decision to finally intervene was motivated by his recognition that Maya's situation had become genuinely dangerous, with psychological pressure that could result in permanent damage to her mental health and cultural identity. His technical skills and insider knowledge of the conspiracy's organization provided him with unique capabilities for gathering evidence and exposing the truth about the harassment campaign's actual leadership and coordination. The anonymous email that Tyler sent to Maya that evening contained cryptic warnings about the true nature of her situation and suggestions for protecting herself from further manipulation, though his continuing fear of exposure prevented him from providing the specific details that would have immediately revealed Chloe's role in orchestrating her harassment. His message represented the first crack in the conspiracy's facade, though Maya's emotional state made her unlikely to recognize its significance without additional support and guidance. Wednesday night ended with Maya more isolated and vulnerable than ever before, caught between competing narratives about her situation that, she lacked the emotional resources to evaluate objectively. The conspiracy against her had reached its most sophisticated phase, utilizing apparent allies and fake revelations to maintain control over her responses, while preparing for the final assault that would force her withdrawal from the talent show through complete psychological devastation. The stage was set for Thursday's climactic confrontation, where all the elements of the harassment campaign would converge in a carefully orchestrated crisis designed to shatter Maya's remaining resistance and eliminate her as competition for Chloe's fourth consecutive talent show victory. The psychological warfare that had begun with simple anonymous notes had evolved into a complex operation involving multiple participants and sophisticated manipulation techniques that approached professional-level psychological abuse. Thursday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability, as if the very air at Lincoln High had been charged with the electricity of an approaching storm that would reshape everything in its path. Maya walked through the familiar corridors with the mechanical precision of someone operating on autopilot, her mind still processing Tyler's cryptic warning while her heart clung desperately to Chloe's promise of justice and resolution. The contradictory messages swirled in her consciousness like competing melodies, creating a dissonance that made clear thinking nearly impossible. The gymnasium doors stood slightly ajar as Maya approached for what she believed might be her final practice session before the talent show audition scheduled for the following week. The space that had once served as her sanctuary now felt like a stage where multiple unseen audiences watched and judged her every movement, transforming the sacred act of capoeira into a performance fraught with external expectations and cultural landmines that threatened to explode with each step. As Maya began her warm-up routine, the familiar movements felt foreign beneath the weight of accumulated doubt and psychological pressure that had been systematically applied over the preceding days. Her ginga lacked its usual flowing rhythm, replaced by stilted motions that reflected her internal struggle between cultural pride and manufactured shame. The spiritual connection that had sustained her through months of grief and adjustment seemed fractured, possibly beyond repair. The gymnasium's acoustics carried the sound of approaching footsteps long before their owners became visible, alerting Maya to the arrival of what appeared to be a small delegation of students and adults whose purpose remained unclear until they emerged fully into the open space. Chloe Bennett led the group with the confident stride of someone orchestrating events according to a carefully planned script, her expression combining apparent concern with barely concealed anticipation of the drama about to unfold. Behind Chloe walked Ms. Patricia Wells, the substitute teacher whom Chloe had identified as Maya's alleged tormentor, though her presence seemed inconsistent with someone who should be avoiding contact with her supposed victim. Ms. Wells appeared confused and slightly defensive, as if she had been summoned to this encounter without full understanding of its purpose or significance. Her body language suggested someone responding to accusations rather than someone caught in the act of harassment. Madison and Sophia flanked the group like strategic advisors, their positions and expressions indicating their readiness to support whatever narrative Chloe was prepared to present during this carefully staged confrontation. Several other students Maya didn't recognize completed the delegation, their presence adding weight and witness to whatever accusations or revelations were about to be delivered in this public forum. Chloe's opening statement was delivered with the dramatic flair of someone who had rehearsed every word and gesture for maximum psychological impact, accusing Ms. Wells of orchestrating the harassment campaign, while positioning herself as Maya's protector and advocate. The substitute teacher's shocked denials and requests for clarification seemed genuine enough to create doubt about the narrative that Chloe was presenting with such confidence and apparent supporting evidence. Maya found herself caught in the middle of an accusation and denial exchange that felt surreal in its intensity and complexity, watching as two adults argued about her experiences while she stood frozen in the center of their conflict. Ms. Wells' confused responses to specific allegations suggested either remarkable acting ability or genuine ignorance about the harassment campaign that had systematically destroyed Maya's confidence over the preceding days. The confrontation escalated as Chloe produced printed emails and documents that she claimed proved Ms. Wells' involvement in the anonymous notes and social media attacks that had tormented Maya throughout the week. The evidence appeared sophisticated and convincing, though Ms. Wells' increasingly frantic denials and requests to examine the materials more closely suggested that something fundamental was wrong with the accusations being leveled against her. Maya's trained instincts, honed through years of reading people's movements and intentions in capoeira's dance-like combat, began to register inconsistencies in the emotional dynamics playing out before her. Chloe's performance seemed too polished, too prepared, while Ms. Wells' confusion appeared genuinely spontaneous and unrehearsed. The substitute teacher's body language reflected someone experiencing false accusations rather than someone caught in criminal behavior. The realization that she was witnessing an elaborate setup rather than a justified confrontation struck Maya with the force of a physical blow, causing her to stagger backward as the full scope of Chloe's deception became clear. Every moment of apparent support and alliance had been carefully calculated manipulation designed to isolate Maya from potential allies, while maintaining control over her responses to the systematic harassment campaign. Tyler Kim's sudden appearance in the gymnasium doorway provided the catalyst that would finally expose the truth about the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed Maya's connection to her cultural heritage and sense of personal worth. His laptop computer contained evidence that he had been gathering throughout the previous evening, documenting the real coordination behind the harassment campaign and revealing Chloe's role as its primary architect and orchestrator. Tyler's nervous but determined presentation of his evidence included recordings of planning sessions between Chloe, Madison, and Sophia, as well as digital footprints that traced the anonymous emails and social media attacks back to accounts controlled by Chloe's network of associates. His technical expertise had enabled him to uncover the sophisticated digital deception that had made the harassment appear to come from external sources rather than internal student coordination. The revelation that Chloe had orchestrated every element of Maya's torment while positioning herself as protector and ally represented a level of psychological manipulation that left everyone present struggling to process its implications and sophistication. Ms. Wells's vindication was overshadowed by the shocking exposure of student-level conspiracy that had utilized adult authority figures as unwitting tools in a campaign of unprecedented cruelty and calculation. Maya's response to learning the truth about her situation transcended simple anger or betrayal, evolving into a profound spiritual awakening that reconnected her with the warrior spirit that Capoeira had always been designed to cultivate and express. The systematic attempt to destroy her cultural identity had instead purified and strengthened her connection to her heritage, transforming her from victim into embodiment of the resistance and resilience that defined her ancestors' struggle for freedom and dignity. The transformation that occurred in Maya's physical presence was immediately visible to everyone in the gymnasium, as her posture straightened and her movements regained the flowing confidence that had been systematically undermined over the preceding days. The fear and self-doubt that had characterized her recent behavior evaporated, replaced by the quiet power of someone who had discovered their true strength through surviving attempts to destroy their essential identity. Chloe's carefully constructed facade began to crumble under the weight of exposed deception and Maya's obvious transformation from broken victim into empowered warrior. The Queen Bee's usual confidence faltered as she realized that her elaborate psychological campaign had ultimately failed in its primary objective, instead creating the very strength and determination that it had been designed to eliminate through systematic destruction of self-worth and cultural pride. Maya's movement into the center of the gymnasium was fluid and purposeful, her body language announcing her intention to reclaim the space that had been contaminated by conspiracy and deception. The capoeira sequence that she began to perform was unlike anything she had demonstrated during her previous practice sessions, combining technical precision with spiritual intensity that transformed martial art into profound cultural expression and personal declaration of identity. The rota that Maya created through her solitary performance generated its own energy and rhythm, drawing power from generations of practitioners who had used capoeira as resistance against oppression and assertion of dignity in the face of systematic attempts to destroy cultural identity. Her movements became a conversation with history, a declaration of continuity, and a rejection of every attempt to make her ashamed of her heritage or doubtful of her right to share its beauty with the world. Madison and Sophia's attempts to interrupt or distract from Maya's performance were met with the focused intensity of someone whose connection to their cultural source had been purified through surviving deliberate attempts at psychological destruction. The flowing transitions between defensive and offensive movements created a protective sphere around Maya that seemed to repel negative energy, while generating positive force that filled the entire gymnasium with transformative power. Tyler's documentation of Maya's spontaneous performance captured not just the technical excellence of her capoeira execution, but also the spiritual transformation that had occurred through her survival of systematic harassment and discovery of inner strength that external forces could damage but never completely destroy. His recordings would become testimony to the power of cultural heritage to sustain and empower individuals facing impossible odds and sophisticated psychological warfare. The climax of Maya's performance came with a sequence of aerial movements that seemed to defy gravity, while expressing the liberation that comes from refusing to be diminished by others' attempts to control or destroy one's essential identity. Her body moved through space with the confidence of someone who had rediscovered their connection to Source, their right to exist authentically, and their responsibility to honor their ancestors through courageous expression of inherited cultural knowledge. Chloe's final attempt to regain control of the situation through verbal attack and renewed accusations was met with Maya's serene confidence and unshakable connection to her cultural foundation, which had been strengthened rather than weakened by surviving the sophisticated attempt to destroy her spirit and eliminate her as competition. The contrast between Chloe's desperate manipulation and Maya's centered power was stark enough to influence everyone present to recognize truth from deception. The talent show auditions that occurred the following week became a celebration of Maya's triumph over systematic harassment rather than a competition for social dominance, as her capoeira performance generated the kind of authentic audience response that no amount of artificial production value could replicate or defeat. Her connection to cultural source and spiritual foundation created an emotional resonance that transcended entertainment to become inspiration and education for everyone who witnessed her courageous expression of inherited identity. Chloe's elaborate performance, despite months of professional preparation and expensive production values, felt hollow and artificial when compared to the authentic power that Maya generated through simple connection to her cultural heritage and hard-won spiritual strength. The audience's response made clear that genuine cultural expression would always possess greater impact than manufactured spectacle designed primarily to maintain social dominance rather than share meaningful human experience. The aftermath of the talent show established Maya as a respected leader within Lincoln High's evolving social ecosystem, as her survival of systematic harassment and transformation into cultural ambassador inspired other students to examine their own relationships with authenticity and courage. Her example demonstrated that maintaining connection to cultural heritage while adapting to new environments required strength rather than compromise, pride rather than shame. Tyler Kim's role in exposing the conspiracy and documenting Maya's transformation earned him respect and friendship that his previous isolation and social anxiety had made seem impossible to achieve. His technical skills, when directed toward justice rather than enabling harassment, proved invaluable for creating positive change within Lincoln High's social dynamics and establishing new standards for authentic community rather than artificial hierarchy. Ms. Wells' vindication and subsequent mentorship of Maya's continued capoeira development created an unexpected alliance that enriched both their lives while providing Maya with adult support that understood and appreciated her cultural heritage rather than viewing it as threat or complication. Their collaboration would eventually expand into community programming that shared Brazilian culture throughout Riverside Falls in ways that honored tradition while building bridges between diverse populations. Emma Chan's loyalty and protective instincts during Maya's crisis deepened their friendship into the kind of lifelong bond that survives distance and time, through shared understanding of what authentic support means during moments of extreme vulnerability and external pressure. Their relationship became a model for genuine alliance across cultural differences, demonstrating how respect and empathy could create connection stronger than similarity of background or experience. Aunt Carmen's pride in Maya's courage and cultural expression provided the family validation that transformed their modest apartment above Café Brasilia into a gathering place for Lincoln High students interested in learning about Brazilian culture and practicing capoeira under Maya's increasingly skilled instruction. The café became a bridge between school and community, providing space for cross-cultural understanding that enriched everyone's educational experience. The impact of Maya's triumph extended far beyond Lincoln High's boundaries, as word of her story spread through social media and local news coverage that celebrated her courage while exposing the sophisticated harassment techniques that had been used against her. Her example inspired other young people facing cultural pressure to maintain pride in their heritage while pursuing educational and social goals in environments that might not initially understand or appreciate their background. Maya's father's teachings, transmitted through years of capoeira practice and cultural immersion, had ultimately provided the spiritual foundation that enabled her survival and transformation during her greatest crisis. His legacy lived on through her courageous expression of inherited knowledge and her commitment to sharing the beauty and wisdom of their cultural tradition with new communities that could benefit from its inclusion in their understanding of human diversity and creative potential. The talent show performance that had seemed impossible just days earlier became the launching point for Maya's development into a cultural educator and community leader whose influence would extend far beyond her high school years. Her story demonstrated that attempts to destroy cultural identity through systematic harassment could ultimately strengthen rather than weaken connection to heritage when met with courage and authentic community support. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.